Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. Disney Plus is back with a brand new Marvel show. We're here with Loki. I don't know if this was an anticipated show. We're going to be getting into it. So we already did a spoiler-free discussion on this for episodes 1 and 2. But today sees the proper official release for episode 1. We're not going to be talking about episode 2 in this one. This is going to be specifically a discussion on episode 1. And as the title suggests, this is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion. So if you haven't seen Loki, why are you watching this for a start? Like, we're going to be covering everything in this. We're going to be going into all the theories. Now, granted, we do have the hindsight of an episode 2 as well, so we're going to keep it pretty much from the perspective of you guys as well. What would your takeaway be from just watching this episode in isolation? So we're not going to give anything away from episode 2. A lot of stuff happens in that, and we're very much looking forward to rewatching that one. So this is just going to be episode 1, so just to get that out of the way from the beginning. But it's good to be back. I keep saying it's good to be back. I know we've had like a few weeks hiatus from Falcon and Winter Soldier. And I mentioned this. I will actually say to everyone, go and check out our spoiler-free discussion on episodes 1 and 2. It's a nice companion piece to this video that we're doing today. This is going to be our regular slot now from week to week on Wednesdays, not Fridays anymore. That's a big shift. That's a big shake-up from Disney Plus. It's going to be every Wednesday at 8 p.m. But we wanted to still get like the spoiler-filled ones out there because there's, especially with this series, there's a hell of a lot to talk about and the ramifications for the MCU. So we're going to get into it in just a second, but before we do, just over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. As we said, this is a spoiler discussion. Nothing is off the table unless you've also seen episode 2. So comment your thoughts. If you have theories, let us know your theories, what you think of the show so far, what you think could happen in the future episodes. Not that we know that answer either. And just your general consensus thoughts, because now you've had a day to watch it. They're calling them Loki Wednesdays now. You know, Loki's broken the timeline. That's the merchandise tag, the hashtags, and it's like, right, see, it's on Wednesdays, which is brackets. Star Wars is going to be Fridays on Disney Plus. Marvel is going to be Wednesdays. I'm absolutely fine with that. But yes, as Chris said, we are around every week. So every Wednesday is our Loki spoiler discussions. But we do have a lot of other videos coming up on the way. There's been a fair few new releases this week, and we've not really spoken about them yet. Not seen a few of them yet. So stick around, get us up on our socials. We'll let you know what videos are going to go up and when. That's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy. And we have a link to the TeePublic in this store in the description below. We also put a link to the Infinity Saga retrospective because we're going to once again plug our Thor: The Dark World discussion because once again Marvel are trying to make that film relevant, and we'll get into that very slightly in this episode, no doubt. But and then last bit to plug this Sunday, episode 1, Reboots from Hell. We're rebooting Pulp Fiction, and we have the monsters that have done it before Hollywood. So that's the kind of tagline I keep saying for this stuff now. But I'm excited for that. But no, we're here to talk Loki and Tom Hiddleston, and we're going to kind of mention what we spoke about yesterday, the spoiler-free one, that heading into this show, what were our thoughts? I'm going to go back to the announcement of a Loki show that I loved his arc leading it to Infinity War, which we get to talk about today, which I'm fine excited. I can tell people we can talk about that. I love what they did with him by the end of the story, and I did not like the fact that you got that Endgame scene where he went for the portal. I was like, okay, Loki's going to get a film or a show or something, and then they announced, I think this was the first show they announced before WandaVision, before Falcon and Winter Soldier. This was always the one that people were speaking about. And I was also like, why isn't this the first show? I think this was even filming first, maybe. I need to double check that. But this was very much, I think, Marvel's big first show of the 3. So I'm calling this like the first wave because end of this year we're going to get like what She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, and Hawkeye. We're going to get a bit of a gap now, which is nice because we're getting films. But Loki is going to be the sort of the first 3 shows. How do we feel about it? And trailers didn't do too much for me, but episode 1 got me right in it. It's kind of like a pilot with a hell of a lot of explaining, and I'm here for it because I think there was explanations needed. And yes, it can be very wordy, but there's enough in there as sort of an initial impression on the episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sort of like going back to the announcement with the first 3 shows that were announced, WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and this one. I remember at the time, out of all 3 going, well, I don't really need WandaVision. Vision was killed and it just seems like a retread. How are they bringing him back? Why? What is the point? Let's move on with the story. And I was kind of the same with Loki as well. Obviously, from that scene with Endgame, which we'll talk about in just a second, because that is the opening scene from this first episode, which I thought was a really good way to sort of reacquaint people and remind people of where the last time that we saw Loki was. Loki's a weird character in that I love Tom Hiddleston as Loki. I think you mentioned that, like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, like Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. He is that character. He has just completely embodied that character. A fan favorite, and I think maybe the whole fan favorite thing is kind of what turned me off to Loki. When you see a character constantly on social media, and I'm like this with TV shows as well, when something's just completely overhyped, I kind of distance myself from it. I don't know why. I don't know if that's like a narcissism thing. I don't know what it is, but it's something that always happens with me. So Loki was kind of the same thing for me. I loved his death, quote unquote, death in Infinity War, I guess we can say now. Thought that was a great way to end the character. Very emotional, really good introduction to that film. Yeah, and then when we got that scene in Endgame, I was like, oh, here we go again. We just can't let go, can we? Characters can't just stay dead. So really, out of the 3 shows, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was the one where I thought, okay, well, this is actually a continuation dramatically of the narrative of the MCU. And then we got to this one. So on first viewing, I still really liked this, but I kind of had a few problems with it. It didn't really sort of strike a chord with me as much as I think it did with a lot of people that got an early screening for it. I rewatched this one today because I needed to. There's a lot of information, as you mentioned. There's so much exposition. Even episode 2 has quite a lot as well, but that's going to be another discussion for next week. But especially in this first episode, I needed a rewatch. And I will say that this is the first of so far, the 3 Disney Plus TV shows that have actually gone back and rewatched an episode in very quick succession. And I'm so glad I did, because I had I won't say a complete 180, because as I mentioned, I did enjoy it the first time I watched it, but I got so much more from this first episode, and little things that maybe I didn't have full focus and attention on the first time. I dialed into a lot more with this one. And I actually think this could be one of the most interesting, certainly in terms of the environment, but I think more importantly, the ramifications for the MCU. Like, granted, with Falcon and Winter Soldier, we've got a new Captain America. That's still a big deal going into the future films. WandaVision still has elements that could come up, especially in Doctor Strange 2, but it felt more like an emotional epilogue to Wanda's character moving into the next few films. This one is like the lore, the mythology in this thing. This is going to be massive. Yeah. So I'm so glad that I did a rewatch for this, because I would have felt pretty lost going into this spoiler discussion. I'm not going to lie, had I not gone back to it.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It feels like sort of Mandalorian, to cast our minds back even further, where
we've lost George. We've lost George already.
I'm the same. I didn't rewatch any of Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Cut me off.
You're good now. Yeah.
I didn't rewatch Falcon and Winter Soldier. I didn't rewatch WandaVision, and I enjoyed them week to week as a show. However, it didn't have that necessity to come back. A couple of clips did, but this is the first I sort of watched both of these on Sunday, and I was like, oh, okay. I'm probably going to watch each one again before we discuss them. I just didn't get a chance to stay in. I think that's a good sign, right? Yes, it's exhibition words, but it's because it's creating a new world, which sounds ridiculous in a series like Marvel, where there's already worlds and multiverses as hinted at in previous entries and all this stuff. And I mean, like the TVA, this is something brand new I know nothing about. I'm not going to say I've got comic knowledge history. I know a fair amount about comics, but I'm not some like encyclopedia for Marvel. And I know nothing about this, and I'm intrigued. And I think this is what the show did so well. The whole sort of kind of around like a doctor's thing, like take a ticket, look at the TV screen. Here's the instructions. You mentioned to me Jurassic Park, I think, on chat the other day.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, let's explain it to babies. And I think that's genuinely what we needed. And there was so much to take in. And I just had a really fun time with it. And I think what this show does by sacrificing, sacrifice is a really unfair word. The fact that the opening episode, nothing really changes story-wise. It finishes as it begins. Mm-hmm. He's not gone out and done anything. He's not gone to the real world. He's not gone to other worlds. It's all set in that sort of same place. It's basically him just sitting in a room with Owen Wilson for an hour. And I'd have took 2 more hours because they're amazing together. We'll get into that, no doubt. But that's what's kind of really struck me, is that they're setting something really big up. And I think that's the only way I can explain it, that, they keep saying break the timeline, the merchandise? Sorry, I think, we know there's a multiverse happening. It's going to be in Spider-Man. It's going to be in Doctor Strange. WandaVision's had the seeds of it. It's mentioned things.
Oh, we've lost George again.
Like this. I think Loki's going to be the one that does it. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to say, I think Loki's the one that's going to cause all this.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense as well, like the god of mischief and everything, which they like to keep bigging him up as in this, or he likes to keep bigging himself up as, which is a big part of his character in this one. We've got a comment from Cole here. He says, are we thinking Loki is being lied to? It feels like everything is being set up to break him. I think there's something bigger at work. Obviously, we've seen the first 2 episodes, but even beyond that, I still think there is something underlying, which I think is gonna. I don't know what it could be, but leading up to the finale, I definitely feel like nothing's as it seems, and that Loki is an instrument in everything that's going on and has a purpose. We do know that it has been confirmed for a season 2, which is quite the frustrating thing, really, with Marvel, especially when it comes to the films, where we always mention when Infinity War ended, we already knew that so many of those actors had contracts for like 2, 3, 4 movies down the line, and we knew they weren't going anywhere. And it's kind of the same with this TV show, because, going into this, I had so many thoughts of where this could end and sort of how it could wrap up back into the MCU. But now we know that there's a season 2 confirmed, then we know that they're going to take their time with this thing, and we could be spending a hell of a lot of time with Owen Wilson's character, and obviously Loki's character is going to be around to stay for a while. Yeah, I guess we could sort of like go into the opening scene from this thing as well, because I think the TVA is definitely going to be, because it's a new environment, it's a new world, essentially. It's like sort of a world between worlds almost. We need to pick up sort of like where this thing picks up. So right after Endgame, we open with I think it's the pretty much unabridged footage really from that scene from Endgame. And then we cut to him picking up right after where he disappears to with the Tesseract. I like that they filled in that blank space there, and you can, it is like a nice, well, it fundamentally is a deviation, isn't it? That's the whole concept of the show. Loki has deviated from the timeline, is arrested because of it. So you can go from Endgame directly into this one, and and you've got like that tangent point. You've got that sort of anchor point from that moment. I thought it was a really fun opening, and this is going to lead into our discussion later in the episode where we talk about Loki himself. Loki does kind of have, in a way, a character arc within this first episode. Now, you might not believe that character arc. He is the god of deception and deceit. Like, you might, when he's pretending to have an emotional moment, he's always got, 1,000 steps ahead of everyone. But he does start off as the very egotistical, narcissistic Loki who constantly is his own hype man, really, and that's what we love about the character. But by the end of it, there is a change in him. We'll get into that more when we talk about Loki, but I thought it was a really good introduction to it because we're introduced to sort of these foot soldiers. Essentially, they're almost like Judge Dredd. I always compare them to, with like the armor and everything. These sort of like Minutemen that go in to control time and deviance from the timeline. So it's weird to us because we haven't seen this in the MCU so far. We're kind of in Loki's shoes at this point, in that we're trying to pick up the threads of where things are going. We're just as confused as he is. I love that bit where they put him in like the slow motion bomb and punch him, and it's this really drawn out thing. And even like down to the main sort of like Marvel Studios logo. We'll talk about the soundtrack later as well, but very weird kind of surreal sound to it as well. So I love the intro to this thing. I think it's exactly what it needed to be.
Yeah, and I think you need to pick it up, and we know that if you're not in Marvel by now, you should be, but somewhere in the world there will be somebody that watches this show tonight that hasn't seen Endgame. I know that's really easy for us to laugh about and stuff, but that happens with anything. Mm-hmm. People somewhere have a new entry, and you need to show that opening scene, because you can't just have him waking up somewhere. You need to have that, and I think it was just a really nice way to be like, this is where he was. You want to know what happened next, and we're just going to start it where it was next. No big build-up. He's been gone for months. None of that. It's just we're following him to the next scene, and it reminded me of the sci-fi sort of build-up. We'd spoken about Doctor Who, me and you, before the series came out, and I was kind of really worried about it's going to be like Doctor Who. It's going to be Loki running around in a long coat every week, saving the day, and all this kind of stuff. And that sort of first 10, 15 minutes put that all to sleep, as far as I'm concerned. That the whole TVA, as we mentioned, is a concept. Yes, they do the very obvious killing the other guy that's there because it shows that they're a threat and all this kind of stuff. And I enjoyed it, but it felt world-building. It felt like I've not seen this in Marvel before, and we haven't. And the fact that Loki hasn't, it's a really good audience point for us to follow him, that this is all new to him and he thinks this is all a joke, this is all wrong. And what I love, and I think this is a really big thing for certainly this episode, I'd imagine it might play a big thing across, but this is 2012 Loki. This is the Loki that just lost the Avengers. This isn't the Loki, Infinity War, Ragnarok, Thor, the Dark World, and that was a worry for me heading in. I was like, do they realize that they're taking the villain from that film and literally giving him a new story, but he's got to go back to that. He can't be the Loki we know. And I think the writing handles that so well. Obviously, we'll talk about the actual clips of him watching his life and stuff later on, but the fact that he still felt like the villain, that he was there, like, you've just took me away from my triumphant victory. You don't want me to be the ruler that I'm meant to be. And I loved all of that, because that's kind of not what Loki would say and do, but it is, isn't it? It's very much that this is that version of Loki that's been put into another world. And it must be quite weird for Tom Hiddleston to sort of jump back to not a role from 9 years ago, but it kind of is, seeing how much he has changed.
Did he change all that much, though, really? As a character, he still felt like that. Maybe in Infinity War he did, in that like very short scene that he was in. But yeah, no, that's a good thing, in that this is a past Loki that we're viewing right now, and I think that's quite good. And it does remind you of comic books as a whole, where a story, like a comic book storyline could advance so far, and then it's either rebooted or something happens, and then the status quo is kind of reset to kind of what it was before. So that's why you have so many comic book characters that are kind of enduring as legacy characters, because ultimately it is kind of reset every few years, which can be frustrating sometimes, but I guess they are kind of staying true to the comics in that way, and that it is a continuation in many ways. It's also a retread in some other ways, but without going too in depth, it is sort of like opening the door to all of these many possibilities of what could happen with the character of Loki. So moving on from that, going into the TVA, as we mentioned, like a completely brand new world that we're introduced to. And we've seen some random stuff, we've seen Norse gods in Asgard. We've seen the Guardians of the Galaxy. And it does feel distinctly different from both of those, even in terms of its own lore and its mythology. It feels a lot more cosmic, which I know sounds crazy to say, because we have had all of these countless, we've got Eternals coming out, which looks equally as kind of mind-bending and strange. But this is very much a sort of like its own beast with this thing. But it does kind of, intrinsically tie into everything, like the whole fabric of the very universe, essentially, or universes, which we'll get into later on. I love this. Now, if you go back to our spoiler-free discussion that we talked about, I mentioned that one of my criticisms with this was that the TVA, as opposed to, we get one very nice sort of sci-fi establishing shot from outside, but beyond that, it's this very confined, darkly lit office space. And I still do stand by that in terms of its visuals, it does look very bland, it does look very mundane. I'm going to have to see the whole series to see if it does brighten up and we do get some new locations, because if that is the case, then you're going to have this beautiful juxtaposition from this very, you mentioned it feels like purgatory, that's exactly it. Sort of like faceless corridors, Minutemen all dressed in the same kind of outfits. He moves from room to room, sort of essentially being processed at the beginning of this series, at the beginning of this episode. And it does all feel very confined and claustrophobic. And I guess that's what they're trying to go for. I did actually check some pictures of the TVA afterwards from the comic books, and it does look like there's a lot of sort of like floating desks in the air of people in suits sort of working a day job, essentially. These people have been created to do all of the mundane paperwork and, filing cabinets and everything that goes with sort of like keeping the fabric of the sacred timeline, as they call it, all in check. But even beyond that, we get more than that. I want to talk about Miss Minutes in a minute, where I talked about the Jurassic Park connection. I think that's necessary when you do have a concept that is so out there, and you do have to kind of dumb it down and sort of almost talk down to the audience, but they do it in a creative way. It clearly reminds you of the DNA strand from Jurassic Park, where it's like, this is how the concept works, this is the world that we're in, and you immediately understand all the rules, even if it doesn't kind of make entirely a whole lot of sense to you. If it does feel very sort of like fantastical, it's still the laws of what they're setting up within this universe. So I loved it. On a second rewatch, I saw more what they were trying to do with it and the appreciation for that. And, that will tie into when we talk about Owen Wilson's character. So it's just a really fascinating environment, and the mythology as well that's tied in with it. That's clearly like deep-rooted comic book stuff, and I don't know that stuff, but when we get that animated segment and we see the 3 space lizards, as Loki called them, I know I've seen visually those characters in like drawings of the characters before. I couldn't tell you their names. They probably have individual names and, a long history in the comic books. I don't know that stuff. but yeah, just kind of what it's leading to, and we're getting deep into like the mythology lore stuff now. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy did so much with Infinity Stones, but this kind of ties in with Loki and how he's humbled. But even Infinity Stones don't have power in this universe, in this place. This is its own place, completely separate from any kind of reality you can even imagine.
Definitely. I want to bring up this coming from Carl, because this is what I thought. The infomercial was propaganda saying there's only one timeline, yet we know that isn't true. I think this is part of the bigger picture, right? That we know we're getting multiverses. I'm going to keep saying that. And we'll be able to probably, maybe in 4 weeks' time, we'll be proven wrong. And we'll be saying, okay, they're going to do it in Spider-Man, not anything else that's been before it. But when the fact there's like a TV advert dedicated to 3 men creating the timeline, and even going back to Endgame, when you've got the ancient one, which has got the strands, which was a really cool way to do it. Like, you must put everything back here the way it's meant to be. And it's very much a time travel thing. But this one feels like it's not messing in time travel. This one was sort of messing in tenses. That your past is still your future. Very much that kind of and sort of that attack. And it's very different. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be time travel. But this is where that poetry idea comes from, is that, there is a moment where they could send him back to being captured by the Avengers if they wanted to. And that is a goal, I guess, of the TVA upon the first sort of 15, 20 minutes. Like, we'll send you back or we'll kill you. And this is where Owen Wilson comes into it, that, something is going on. We don't know what. We get the first mention of the big M, Mephisto. Get him out of the way. Obviously, we get Owen Wilson in that scene in like France. And there was a giant devil. Was there like satanic music as well? And
they mention like the devil. You got the stained glass window of Lucifer, essentially the red with the horns. The devil, as you mentioned. But later in that discussion on a rewatch, because I lost my mind when I saw that bit, I was like, "Oh my god, Mephisto finally confirmed after 3 Disney Plus TV shows we're here." But later in that conversation, especially at the end of the episode, when we know that the variant they're chasing is a variant of Loki himself. Yeah. He says, no, the variant we're chasing is kind of like the devil himself. I can't remember the direct line. So the devil kind of ties into Loki and not Mephisto, which was what I hoping for. But if it was Mephisto, what a great alluding to that character if they had have done that.
Yeah, it was smart. And I was just sat there like, oh, here we go again, the big M. And, maybe we probably won't mention him again, hopefully not for the next 5 weeks. But I was down for it. That Owen Wilson. Listen, I love Owen Wilson's films. I like those comedies that he does. The Vince Vaughn ones, like Wedding Crashers and all that. I love a dumb comedy. I think that very few films are better. Those sort of Friday night ones. Obviously, Zoolander is my favorite film he's done. And I've not seen any of his Wes Anderson stuff, which I need to get out of the system straight away. I'm not a Wes Anderson fan. And I know that he has done a lot more than just comedies, that he has a lot of fans. And when he gives it all, he can be a very good actor. So again, I've not seen those films. So seeing him in this, I was like, oh, like aged Owen Wilson, like not blonde hair, like gray hair. And it was, he actually kind of reminded me of like Tony Stark's dad. And I was kind of not worried about him, but I was kind of like, how is Owen Wilson going to do the whole Tom Hiddleston thing? Like in the trailers, you were getting lines, weren't you, that it was going to be, talky this and this. I was like, is this like that sort of, Marvel has their humor sometimes where it doesn't work, and when it doesn't work, it's quite blatant. And Owen Wilson was fantastic in this. I think he's the best thing in the show so far.
Scene stealer, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the pair of them, they're just, like I said earlier, I would take more out of them two just talking together. I think because they're such cold opposites, not even polar, it is almost, yes, I've read your entire file. You're going to backstab me. You're going to do this. You're going to keep talking your way out of it. And you get all these Lokiisms that you can see in the trailer, in the episode. I like that Owen Wilson knew everything before. Because I, for one, my biggest problem with Loki as a character is that, yes, he's predictable. He's predictable because he's unpredictable, and he will always betray them because that's the Loki character, to betray, to be mischievous. And I just like the fact that we've got a show where they're not doing that. Whereas, like, we know your history, so we're just not going to believe anything you do. And I think that just makes him more interesting from the get-go. And I think the big thing for this is the fact that it's this big drama, which is ultimately leading to, the moment he mentions, we're seeing clips of the past, and I was like, here we go. Here we go. We're going to get something really dark and depressing. And you get the scene of Thor 2.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, he's got a little bit of his future there. I was like, are we going to get some like big season finale where he tells him he died? I am so relieved. I know this is maybe jumping too far, but I'm so relieved that when we got to that scene, they just played it straight up to Infinity War, end of tape. I think that worked well, and it built up to that well. I think it was the big thing. The Owen Wilson scenes with him help that scene work because of how much a grounded discussion he's having with him. He strips him down to his basics, just like a child.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a detective you'd get it. I mean, if you watch any kind of real life, sort of like investigatory detective tapes where they're questioning like these horrible people and they're trying to get into them, it is like a game of chess almost, that they're trying to get the information they need and they're kind of playing them at their own game. It is the humbling of Loki, basically. The icon, that sort of like laying him bare in this episode almost. Because we've seen Loki at work, like he is, words are his strongest power really, and getting into people's heads and, deceit and getting his own way. We see that in the first Avengers film when he has that altercation with Black Widow, which, he's orchestrating the whole plan essentially, which is kind of a trope that, feels very much like a carryover from The Dark Knight when we see Batman and, Christian Bale, Heath Ledger in that film. A lot of films were trying to do the same thing afterwards, Avengers being probably one of the main proponents of that, probably because it's also like a superhero film. We see it in Thor: The Dark World, where, he's again in a jail cell and he manages to talk his way out of it. It's very clear from the off with this one, especially from Owen Wilson's character, that you have no power here. Your words aren't, time doesn't matter here. Your words aren't going to matter here, especially because Owen Wilson's kind of been tracking, especially because he's been, pursuing a Loki variant this whole time. He knows Loki's motivations. He's kind of almost a step ahead of Loki. And Loki doesn't like that. Loki is never the person that sort of backseat to anyone in terms of like planning things out. So it's a great new dynamic that we haven't seen before. We've seen Loki play the fool. We've seen him get beaten up by the Hulk and get bested a bunch of times. And they draw reference to that as well. It's almost like the Darth Maul character, where is he a character that's sort of, it's in his nature to fail constantly again and again. He's always vying for power or revenge, and he's just never going to get it. The fact that Loki himself gets the Tesseract, the thing that he's been pursuing all the way, from the first Thor film, the first Avengers film, he's finally got it and he's holding it in his hands, and it does absolutely nothing. And I love that Owen Wilson's character of Mobius is that character to do that. I'm kind of the same with you as well. Like, Owen Wilson is an actor who I've enjoyed, but he's felt very samey in a lot of the comedies. That's kind of feels how he always gets cast, whether it be Wedding Crashers or, his role in Night at the Museum, or I think he was in Meet the Parents, wasn't he? And Meet the Fockers as the boyfriend, the kind of the trouble love triangle kind of situation. He's always kind of been that character to me. And I haven't seen, maybe he has done some dramatic stuff on the side, but I think he's very much been in terms of comedy. And he does still have, some funny lines in this and how he plays it, but it felt so different. Never in like A Month of Sundays would I have said cast Owen Wilson as this character, but he really works in their dynamic. And I'm kind of there rewatching this episode, just hanging on their every word. I could have just watched it pretty much as a whole episode where the two of them are just talking with each other, but it doesn't drag. It doesn't feel like it's outstaying its welcome. You are wanting to learn more about the TVA, this world, and kind of what's the bigger picture is and what's going on. In the spoiler-free discussion, I mentioned that he reminds me of a character, both of which kind of tie in with Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. You've got the character of Will from Manhunter, who is a person who sort of like dedicated his whole life to getting into the mind of a criminal to get one step ahead of them and ultimately to capture them, but also kind of becoming like them at the same time. And, like Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, she has to enlist the help of one of the, the world's biggest monsters, essentially, in Hannibal Lecter, in order to enlist his help to catch someone else who's even more dangerous than even he is. And it's kind of that dynamic with this, where I need essentially help directly from the horse's mouth to capture this other Loki that's out there that's way more powerful. And I love that. That's so fascinating, I think.
And it's the fact it's not a big reveal 5 minutes in. This is a moment where it comes near the end, and it's to get that hook that come back in a week's time. I guess we can get to I think we always speak about that sort of Disney week thing we're doing now. As every series goes by, I think Disney is shutting down all those arguments about the binge watching and whatnot. Really quick comment. I don't really remember this because I watched once. Was that a female version of Loki in the church? I don't remember there being a girl in the church, or was that the devil? What I would say is that if they were going to do a female Loki, Eva Green would be the perfect.
Oof.
I know. I
Yes.
don't think she's in She's not in IMDb, so we don't need to worry about a female Loki.
Mhm.
So who knows? I know that he's gender fluid now. I don't know if that
Yeah.
means you can be a man and woman, but Eva Green cast as female Loki. Let's get on that hype train.
Oof.
That being said,
that's a reboots from heaven. I think I don't know if that's a reboots from hell. My God.
I mean, Natalie Portman's Thor next year, so who knows? But
That's
nothing
true.
is off the table, and she's not been in Marvel yet. So let's get that trending. That being said, let's talk about the big scene, because the whole point of their scene together is to build up to Loki getting the tape. And I love the whole side plot of him trying to escape, him doing all of that. It wasn't to never escape. He wanted to watch what happened next. He didn't believe them, and this is the beauty of having rewatched all 23 this year. It was like a lot of Facebook memories on this day. It's like, hey, remember when he helped get us? It's a bit unfair. I'm going to say it's my one gripe is that, oh, you made them kill your mom. And going back to what Carl said really early today, is Loki being lied to. Well, he does send the thing on the left, but he's sending them to Thor's room, and Freyr is only in there as a trap for the I forgot what they're called, the Dark Elves that says everything's no.
Yeah.
And that's why he didn't directly be responsible for killing them. And they were very selective of the clips they should. I don't know if maybe I'm looking into this too much, but I certainly felt like there's a bit of twisted truth in there. They were only showing him some of the things they wanted him to see. For example, didn't show the part where he became Odin and sent him to Shady Acres from South Park, Cairn and stuff like that. So it was one of those really interesting ones where I wonder if there is a bit of that in there. And Owen Wilson, the character he's very much playing so far, it feels like I don't trust Owen Wilson. Doesn't trust Loki. I don't trust Owen Wilson. There's something else going on there that we don't know about, and I think that's the ambiguity of the series, is that there is a lot of questions unanswered for the timeline for Loki, for Owen Wilson, and all that kind of stuff. And just that scene, though, we knew it was going to get to the Infinity War moment, and I think it's the way Tom Hiddleston sells it. It's not quite McConaughey in Interstellar with the kids growing up scene. It's not quite there, but his reaction the moment Thanos appeared was, because you've got to think, this is 2012 Loki, right? The geezer's just got the staff of Thanos and failed him, and he's seen his future of him trying to kill Thanos and dying. That, and also a bit weird that he got to see the ship being exploded after. Bit weird, but I'll let that slide. But the fear in Tom Hiddleston's face in that scene was phenomenal, and then it was the laughter. It was that sort of like broken cackle, and I thought that scene was the best scene of this episode for me. It was unbelievable. And you knew it was coming. And I think that was the big thing. When you know it's coming, how are they going to deliver it? How are they going to do it? And they did it in such a perfect way. Even, with the whole green screen, that it wasn't the clips from the film. It was almost the forefront. It was just seeing, the characters, not necessarily the environment. I think that went a long way.
Yeah, they did like a quick selection tool around the background, didn't they? And just click delete on it, and that was it. It is kind of weird. I get why they've done it, but it's miraculous how these memories that are being shown to him are all perfectly edited, direct clips from the film. I know obviously why they've had to do that. This was my favorite part of the entire episode, because it was like genuine emotion. Like I always talk about with the Marvel films, that comedy can get in the way sometimes, but when it can go into like the actual character and show some of that depth and growth, then that's all well and good with me. This gave me the kind of emotional release and reaction really to the events that had gone on that I wish I'd have got from Thor Ragnarok. I always talk about the film, and I know we differ greatly in our opinions on that film. It was very different from the Thor character, but I felt like the comedy in that film kind of got in the way of the real drama that should have happened, seeing the devastation of Asgard and the ramifications of things like that. And we never really got that from that moment, which I thought was a huge pivotal moment, which should have been for Thor's character. But we actually get moments of emotion where Loki is looking at all these events that are happening, especially the death of his mother as well, which like the mother's always been like the kind of constant for him, I think. He's always been closer to his mother, like the love between, like a mother and a son. So seeing that and then being told that he was kind of to blame for the death of Frigga is a huge impact to him as well. And seeing his death, it's kind of like that 300 thing where it's proof that even a god can bleed, a god can die. And to see his own death, I think that was kind of like the gut punch to him. You're not as all powerful as you think you are. Like you can try all these lofty quests for ultimate power and, devastation and everything and leadership. But ultimately, this is where your timeline's going to end, and that's how you're going to die. It was a beautiful moment. I thought Hiddleston, that was easily his best, acted scene in the entire episode. I'm just glad they showed us that, and maybe I'm thinking of things ahead to episode 2. I can't remember if they show any more clips, but I'm glad. I think the clips that they showed as well, it even made me sort of like think back to Ragnarok, and there's only like, I can count on one hand, like the scenes that I enjoy from that film, but they reworked them into this film, and, the emotional clips that maybe didn't have the impact that they did within that film with the new soundtrack. We'll talk about the music in a second, and it essentially being a clip show, his greatest hits, I think Owen Wilson calls it in the episode. It hit me a lot more, and it did make me kind of think back to Ragnarok and The Dark World, 2 of my personal least favorite MCU films, and go, okay, they were doing something there. And, surely when they look back, we mentioned this as well, that had they have known how intrinsically linked The Dark World would be to pretty much every other MCU film, they probably would have made it a lot better than it actually was. But it's nice to know that they're trying to make that film more relevant by having moments like this in it.
Yeah, and that was my big question heading into the rewatch. The start, I was like, this is the first time I've seen this since, I think, the cinema or pre-Ultron. I was like, is Endgame made this film relevant? And when I rewatched it, I was like, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. It didn't help it. And this show's the same. I won't rewatch it now, but I appreciate that it's taking one of the only good moments in it and using it to its advantage, because it was a big story moment. And the fact that Endgame had that same core when they did go back to Asgard, it was the whole, this is the day my mother died, and it's Thor's conversation with his mother. And this scene was Loki's conversation with his mother, not Odin. None of that. As much as we love him, obviously we didn't get much of him. We got his death scene, which was really weird. To show that one part. I guess why it did make sense, but I don't think it showed Hela. It had them turning around and all this stuff, and I just love the way even that was done. It felt stylish, that it wasn't this just modern screen. It was a reel. It said that, like film finished. Mm-hmm. It ran out of clippings, and that was it, done and dusted. And I think it just had its own unique spin that just separated it from other things in that way. And I think the worst one was I mean, it's not out yet, so I'm making the cut, but in the Black Widow trailer. I don't know if you remember, there's Taskmaster watching clips of Black Widow, but it's the Iron Man 2 hallway sequence, and it is the exact same shot. And I'm like, oh, you're just watching Iron Man 2, are you, Taskmaster? Mm-hmm. Whereas if it had been, it would have looked really bad, but by doing something different with the editing, I think that really did help. Mm-hmm. Just want to bring up this comment from Cole. Loki found the stones important in this world, they're paperweights. He loved his mother, yet they're saying he was responsible for death. It feels like he's being played with. I can see that. I love the fact the stones are kind of rendered useless. When that drawer opened, and I was like, oh my word, the Infinity Stones are back. Like, they never left. Here we go again. Gauntlet number 3, 4, whatever they want to do. And I sort of thought, yeah, we've got tons of them. They just don't work here. And this sort of leads me to ambiguity. Why don't they work here? What are the time people doing? Is there power that, makes this world, makes them unusable in this world? I loved all the questions I've had from it. So as a sort of pilot in episode 1, it does raise those questions of what is going to happen next. And this is what I don't know. I know we've seen episode 2, but I can say the same thing to that. I don't know what's going to happen next. It's done so well in creating a mystery. And this is why I'm getting those WandaVision comparisons where, because I'm hooked and it's took 1 episode, because I'm in, they don't need to sell it to me anymore. I'm going to watch every week. I'll watch it. Oh, it's a shame it's 55 minutes long because I can't get away with watching that whilst I'm working. But it is one of them where I'm going to have to turn off my phone every Wednesday morning now until my lunch break. So it's done the right things for me. And I think that's what you want, right? For an episode 1, you don't want too much. You don't want them to, I know Falcon Winter Soldier kind of did it. It maybe had its best sequence of the series in its opening scene. And you could maybe say Mandalorian season 2, bar Luke at the end, the best episode for me of both seasons is episode 9. Just the opening of season 2. You don't want them to go guns blazing on a pilot. And this is what I would say, actually, we haven't really mentioned it. This feels like a pilot. This feels like it wasn't filmed at the same time as the other 6 episodes. We've seen episode 2, so I know we've got a bit of background on that. This one feels like, hey, we want to do this show. Is it going to work? Let's make a pilot. This works, we'll get a series order. Because series 2 is, not series 2, episode 2 is very different to this. But I think this one builds the world for the characters to then play in and whatnot. And we're now going to see this world. Whereas we've been trapped in a character-driven plot, which is nothing wrong with that. And that, I know I've kind of covered loads of points there, but that's it's a really big thing for me that it's not trying to do too much in the first episode.
Yeah, and I think in the next episode, this is sort of like the introductory episode to the world, which you absolutely need because it is completely out there. You do need some kind of explanation. You do need to kind of take Loki down a peg or two to sort of like understand that he's going to be he's very much been a villain, but for this, he's kind of almost going to be like a protagonist in a way, or at least an anti-hero. And I think from episode 2, not going into it too in depth, but you are going to understand the threat and then what they need to do. And we're still completely clueless as anyone would be, even after episode 2, as to where it's going to lead to. If I'm going to give my overall thoughts on it, definitely on a second viewing for this, I appreciated it a whole lot more. The soundtrack, we didn't even talk about the soundtrack. I do want to bring that up very, very quickly. Just bring up the name of the composer here. Natalie Holt. She's a British composer. And listening to it again, there are sort of like loads of different sci-fi action kind of sounds to the music. There's bits of Blade Runner in there. There's bits of Inception, Tenet. There's even some moments where it sounds like the Joker, like these kind of like cello pieces to it, kind of weird sounding stuff. And she's actually worked with Hans Zimmer and Hilda. Oh God, I've forgotten her name. Hilda
Gould something.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and pronounce her surname because I'll just butcher it. But the composer for Joker, she's worked with them before, so you can kind of see those influences in the soundtrack. It's this very sci-fi, synth-heavy kind of sound, but it's unusual. It's different, and every time when it hits those credits and that sort of like theme kicks in, it's very different from what we've had before. So I'm really appreciating the theme as well. I think that kind of ties in with the whole lore and mythology that's being built up. There's probably some great Easter eggs in there as well. I've only noticed one. I don't know if it's actually an Easter egg, but it's kind of my interpretation of it. The animated segment that you get in the episode, it actually kind of reminded me of, I've never played the game properly, but Fallout. I know that Fallout's got a lot of these sort of films, these film reels with like animated characters. There's sort of like a mascot that crops up a lot in the Fallout games. If you played the Fallout games, you know what I'm talking about. And the animation style kind of reminded me of those a little bit. I think you see a frost beast in there, the thing that Thor kills when he goes to Jotunheim in the first Thor film. It crops up again in the end credit scene of Thor the Dark World. I might be wrong, but you can see something on there that looks similar to it. There's probably a whole lot more in there. And as I haven't read the comic books, I don't know anything about the TVA. I don't know how accurate it is. This is just sort of me guessing that visually it looks kind of the same. I don't know anything about Mobius and all of these other characters. So, of course, if you are a comic books fan, we had this with WandaVision. It'd be great if we can get it again for this. Let us know. Instruct us, send us to articles that we can read up, because I always like knowing more about sort of like the comic book versions. I know that the MCU very much does its own thing, and, all the better for it. It's its own identity. But as a first episode, I think it's tremendous. And I think that it's kind of blending the good things about both the previous Disney Plus series that we've had. It's kind of like the straight dramatic narrative that we had from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, with that dash of the intrigue there and the mystery that's going to keep bringing you back week to week, like we got in WandaVision. So it's kind of like a nice mash of the two, but I'm sold from episode 1. I know I've seen episode 2, but even if I was just watching this in isolation, absolutely completely on board for this thing. And I want to know how it ties in with the MCU. It's dangling these carrots all in front of me, and I want to know where it's going.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, is that it's left us wanting more, and we know we're going to get more, but the premise has done enough to sort of warrant that. What is next? We don't know. And I think that's a really big thing. You want the ambiguity, and you don't want a marketing campaign that's gone wrong, right? You don't want them to say it was going to be this big bravado showcase and then actually have a stereotypical A to Z type series that doesn't take risks, that doesn't try and be something different. And I think that's where the show's going. And as you kind of mentioned with that point, it's exactly what you need from the first episode. And I'm here and I'm ready for every Wednesday. I know next week I need to catch up and rewatch episode 2, but the fact I can say that is that I need to rewatch episode 2.
Yeah.
Says about how insane this show is going to be, because it is one that I'm excited to see people reacting to, for them to have that discussion online. And listen, Falcon and Soldier was great. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a solid show, but it didn't have that level of, we must come back next week to find out what's going to happen. And the fact this one has it on a first episode, to me, that's more than enough. So I'm here for that journey, and I'm very excited to do it.
Absolutely. So that'll do it for our initial first episode spoiler discussion on Loki. And we want to hear from you as well. We've had Carl commenting today. But if you're just discovering this after we've gone live, do let us know your thoughts on episode 1. What were your thoughts going into it? Did it meet those expectations, or did it completely blow those expectations out of the water? Do let us know, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, we're going to be back every Wednesday with our spoiler discussion on this. We've got a lot of other shows, a lot of other reviews coming out, but this is going to be sort of like the set schedule for at least the next 6 weeks for the entire series of Loki. So Wednesday, 8 p.m. BST. So make sure that you come back for those ones, because believe us, at least from the next episode, things get very interesting. So next week is definitely not one to miss. We've got a lot of other stuff coming out. So obviously that is a regularly scheduled programming that we have on our channel. We also have our James Bond review. So we'll be back on Tuesday next week with The Man with the Golden Gun. Once again, 8 p.m. And our new show that's starting this weekend, Sunday the 13th. We're going to be doing Reboots from Hell. This is a show that, was your idea, George, and, we're very excited to get into this one. It's a hell of a one to kick off with as well, Pulp Fiction, where we sort of like pitch our reboot for Pulp Fiction, a complete recasting of the characters, new directors, just a whole new vision for it. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's starting this Sunday. Is there anything else that I haven't mentioned? Reviews, I guess, but...
I was going to say one thing. Obviously, we did the Marvel series, which was great. We're going to bring a lot of people on that were on that over the next couple of weeks. So there's me and Chris at the moment, but each week expect somebody new to pop up. We're not going to give away who it is, but we're going to get a couple of returning faces. It's not some weird Loki intentional thing, by the way, for like God of Mischief and whatnot. They're not the same person looking different. It's not a Mission Impossible, but there'll be a couple of faces, which is great because it means we can spice it up and get different opinions every week. So looking forward to that. It's kind of what we did with The Mandalorian if you're around for season 2 of that. Mm-hmm. But new reviews. There's a couple of films coming out, obviously. Fast Line's in a couple of weeks, so we don't have to worry about that. But I would say in the next week, expect reviews for Nobody, In the Heights, and The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. Don't know when. I was going to say don't know when, don't know where. I was going to do that awful song. But no, the new films come out. It's lovely. It's lovely the cinemas have opened, and now it's reached the point of going to the cinema for films I don't want to see again. So bring on a 2.5-hour musical. Yay.
Absolutely. And, if you want to find more information on those, when we actually know when we're going to do them, best places to follow us on our social medias. So Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, Letterboxd, which is going to be crucial for this weekend show as well. So do follow us on there. We've got some new lists on there that are going to tie in with that Reboots from Hell. That's letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And for merch, TeePublic link in the description down below. Please go check that out and pick up any merch should you wish. That'll do it for us for our first spoiler discussion on Loki. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.